I'm Lila, 32 female. I live with my wonderful husband, Alex, in a quiet suburban home that we've spent the last few years turning into our sanctuary. I'm a social worker, a job that is often emotionally draining but deeply rewarding, and now we're about to embark on our biggest project yet. We're expecting our first child. My life, for the first time, feels truly and authentically my own. But for decades, it felt like I was just an actor in a play directed by my mother. A play where she was the long-suffering saint, and I was merely a supporting character in her tragic, beautiful story. That all came to an end at my baby shower, where I finally rewrote the script. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My mother, Meredith, is a performer. It's not just her official title as the director of our town's community theater. It is the very essence of her being. Every room she enters becomes a stage, every conversation a monologue, and every family gathering a one-woman show. The production she's been running for the last 20 years is her masterpiece, titled The Sacrifices of a Single Mother. In it, she plays the starring role of a woman wronged, a gentle soul abandoned by a cruel husband, left to raise 2 children, myself and my younger brother Ethan, with nothing but her own grit and endless love. It's a compelling story, one that brings tears to the eyes of new friends and distant relatives. The only problem is that it's a work of fiction. The reality of my childhood was starkly different, but my memories were always treated as inconvenient script notes that detracted from the director's vision. So, for most of my life, I learned to play my part. I would sit quietly at Christmas dinners, nodding along as Meredith recounted the tale of how she'd worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. She'd leave out the part where one of those jobs was a bi-weekly volunteer shift at the theater, and the other was a part-time, 4-hour-a-week gig at a bookstore. The third job never existed at all. She'd conveniently forget to mention the substantial alimony and child support my father paid without fail. Money that was often spent on new costumes for the theater's latest production or dinners out with her friends, while I was at home figuring out how to stretch a $20 bill to cover groceries for 3 days. A perfect example of this was the annual town bake sale. In Meredith's telling, she'd stay up all night, flour dusting her tired face, baking dozens of cookies to support our school. "I was so exhausted," she would say, her voice trembling with remembered fatigue, "but I looked at your little faces sleeping, and I knew I had to do it for you." The audience, usually a captive table of relatives, would sigh in admiration. My brother Ethan, who was only 6 when our parents divorced, would look at her with pure adoration. He had no other memories to contradict her narrative, but I remembered. I was the one who stayed up all night. At 11 years old, I was the one reading the recipe on the back of the chocolate chip bag, carefully measuring the sugar, and pulling tray after tray of cookies from the hot oven while Meredith was at a late-night rehearsal for A Streetcar Named Desire. I remember the sting of a small burn on my forearm from when I'd leaned too close to the oven rack. That little scar was my proof, a silent testament to the truth, but it was a story I was never allowed to tell. Living in this dual reality was exhausting. In public, I was the dutiful daughter of a local hero. In private, I was the household manager, the cook, the cleaner, the tutor, and the primary caregiver for my younger brother. My mother wasn't cruel in a conventional sense. She wasn't mean or abusive. She was simply absent. She lived in a world of her own creation, a world of drama and applause, and the mundane responsibilities of motherhood were an unwelcome distraction. She loved the idea of being a mother, especially a struggling single mother, but she outsourced the actual labor of it to her eldest child. My husband, Alex, was the first person who saw through the performance. When we first started dating, he was charmed by Meredith, as everyone was. He listened to her stories with polite sympathy. But Alex is an engineer. He's a man who deals in facts, in structures, in things that are solid and true. He started noticing the inconsistencies, the little details that didn't add up. If your mom was working so much, how did she have time to direct a new play every single season? He asked one evening after a particularly dramatic story hour at a family barbecue. It was a simple, logical question, but it felt like a lifeline. It was the first time someone had questioned the narrative instead of just applauding it. Slowly, I began to share the truth with him, unburdening myself of secrets I'd held for 2 decades. I told him about the parent-teacher conferences I'd attended for Ethan because Meredith was in a vital dress rehearsal. I told him about learning to do our taxes when I was 16 because the paperwork gave my mother a terrible migraine. I told him about the profound loneliness of raising my brother and, in many ways, my mother, all while trying to raise myself. Alex didn't just listen, he validated. He grew quietly furious on my behalf, his protective instincts clashing with the polite facade everyone was expected to maintain around my mother. Now, with our baby on the way, the stakes felt higher. I didn't want my child raised in the shadow of this grand, suffocating lie. I didn't want them to sit through the St. Meredith story hour and wonder why their mother's childhood sounded so different from the version their grandmother was selling. The simmering resentment I had suppressed for years began to bubble closer to the surface. The catalyst came, as it so often did, with Meredith seizing an opportunity to be the star. The moment Alex and I announced my pregnancy to the family, her eyes lit up with a familiar theatrical gleam. This wasn't just about her becoming a grandmother. It was a chance for a whole new act in her long-running play. It was an opportunity to showcase her matriarchal grace. "A baby shower?" she declared, clapping her hands together. "Oh, Lila, darling, don't you worry about a thing. I will handle everything. It will be my gift to you, a celebration of mothers and daughters." I tried to interject, to say that Alex and I wanted something small and simple, but I was immediately overridden. Meredith had already begun planning, her voice booming as she mentally cast the guest list, the caterers, the theme. Alex shot me a look from across the room, a mixture of concern and resignation. He knew, as I did, that this baby shower would not be about me or the baby. It would be about her. It would be the biggest, most elaborate performance of her life. And I had this sinking feeling in my stomach that it was a performance I could no longer sit through silently. The final act was approaching, and for the first time, I felt a desperate need to take control of the narrative before my own child's story even began. The weeks leading up to the shower were a masterclass in Meredith's particular brand of benevolent tyranny. She dismissed all of my suggestions with a gentle, patronizing wave of her hand. Simple finger foods? Oh no, darling, we must have a proper catered lunch. It's a celebration. A small gathering in our backyard. Don't be silly, your little yard won't do. I've booked the banquet room at the country club. We need elegance. Every decision was framed as an act of selfless love, making my objections seem petty and ungrateful. The shower was becoming less of a celebration of my impending motherhood and more of a coronation for hers. As I navigated the frustrating planning calls, a flood of memories I'd long compartmentalized began to resurface, sharp and painful. The polished veneer of my mother's story began to crack, and the raw, neglected reality of my childhood bled through. I was 8 years old, standing on a step stool in front of the stove, stirring a pot of watery tomato soup. Ethan had the flu. He was 7, bundled in blankets on the couch, his face pale and feverish. Meredith was supposed to be home, but a call had come from the theater. The lead actress in The Glass Menagerie was having a crisis of confidence, and only Meredith, the director, could talk her down. "I'll only be an hour, sweetie," she'd chirped into the phone, her voice already distant. "Lila knows what to do." I did know what to do. I knew how to take Ethan's temperature. I knew which bottle of children's medicine was in the cabinet and how to measure the sticky, purple liquid into the little plastic cup. I knew how to make soup and toast, how to put a cool cloth on his forehead, and how to read him stories until his breathing evened out in sleep. I knew how to be the parent because I'd been practicing for years. Meredith didn't come home for 4 hours. When she finally walked in, flush with the success of having averted a theatrical disaster, she found us both asleep on the couch. The next day, she told her friends, I was up all night with a sick child. The dedication of a mother is just endless. I remember standing there, listening to her accept their sympathy, the words getting stuck in my throat. This process of taking over was what experts call parentification. It's when a child is forced to take on the roles and responsibilities of an adult, sacrificing their own needs and their own childhood in the process. For me, it wasn't a single event, but the very air I breathed. It was the constant, low-level anxiety of being the only responsible person in the house. It was learning to read the electric bill at age 12 and setting aside money from the grocery budget to make sure it didn't get shut off, because Meredith was just terrible with numbers. It was forging her signature on my own field trip permission slips, because she'd forgotten them on the counter for the third day in a row, and I was too embarrassed to ask my teacher for another extension. I remembered the loneliness most of all. While other kids were playing outside, I was inside scrubbing dishes, folding laundry, or helping a tearful Ethan with a math problem I barely understood myself. My mother's world was filled with applause, with cast parties, with the drama and camaraderie of the theater. My world was the quiet, orderly space I had to create within the four walls of our home to keep chaos at bay. She would come home full of stories about her day, about the conflicts and triumphs of her actors, and never once ask me about mine. It was as if she genuinely didn't see me, the child, only the competent, miniature adult who made her life run smoothly. The contrast between her narrative and my reality was a chasm. Meredith loved to tell the story of how she taught me to cook, painting a picture of us side by side in the kitchen, sharing laughter and family recipes. The truth? I taught myself to cook from the instructions on the back of a box of macaroni and cheese because I was hungry and she wasn't home. My first family recipe was a can of cream of mushroom soup poured over 2 chicken breasts, a culinary masterpiece I discovered in a women's magazine she'd left on the coffee table. Alex saw the toll these resurrected memories were taking on me. I was more withdrawn, my usual excitement about the baby tinged with a deep, quiet sadness. One evening, he found me sitting in the half-finished nursery, staring blankly at the wall. "Talk to me, Lai," he said softly, sitting on the floor beside me. The dam broke. I told him everything, the memories pouring out in a torrent. I told him about the bake sale, the flu, the bills, the forgeries. I told him about the crushing weight of being the adult when I was just a child who desperately needed a mother. His expression hardened, not with anger at me, but with a protective fury directed at the woman who was supposed to care for me. "This isn't right, Lila," he said, his voice firm. "You were a kid. You shouldn't have had to do any of that. She stole your childhood." Hearing him say it, so simply and so clearly, was a revelation. I had always framed it as helping out. I had told myself that I was just mature for my age, but Alex was right. It had been stolen. My childhood had been sacrificed to feed my mother's narrative of struggling sainthood. A few days later, another crack appeared. Meredith called, breathless with excitement. "Darling, I was going through old photo albums for the shower for a little surprise I'm planning, and I found the most adorable picture of you. You're about 10, and you're holding Ethan on your lap after he fell off his bike. You look so serious, so grown up. It just shows what a wonderful, nurturing big sister you always were." I froze, the phone cold against my ear. I remembered that day perfectly. Ethan had scraped his knee badly. He was wailing. I had carried him inside, cleaned the wound, and bandaged it myself. I held him on my lap for an hour, rocking him until he calmed down. Meredith had been nowhere in sight. She'd been at an audition for a local commercial. She only saw the photograph later. In her mind, the photo was evidence of the beautiful family dynamic she had fostered. In my mind, it was a snapshot of her neglect. It was a picture of a 10-year-old girl doing a parent's job, and she was planning on showing it at my shower, twisting its meaning to serve her own story. That was the moment a quiet resolve began to harden in my gut. For 20 years, I had allowed her to control the narrative. I had stood by silently while she erased my truth and replaced it with her fiction. Now, she was planning to use my own life, my own memories, as props in her grandest performance yet, at an event that was supposed to be about me, my husband, and our future child. No, I thought, my hand tightening on the phone. Not this time. This time, there would be a new director in the house. The little surprise my mother had alluded to on the phone turned out to be the centerpiece of the entire baby shower. A week before the event, she called me, her voice practically vibrating with self-congratulation. "Lila, darling, I have the most wonderful idea," she announced. "Instead of silly shower games, I'm going to prepare a tribute. A speech, of course, but also a slideshow. A journey through our lives, showing everyone the struggles we overcame and the beautiful bond we share. It will be a celebration of our family's story, a legacy to pass on to my grandchild." My stomach dropped. A slideshow, curated by her. It was a weaponization of nostalgia, and I knew with chill. Certainty that I would not be the hero of this story. "Mom, that's a really big gesture. I don't want you to go to all that trouble. And besides, Alex and I wanted something really casual." "Nonsense," she trilled, completely ignoring my protest. "It's no trouble at all. It's a labor of love. In fact, I'm so excited about it, I want to share a draft of my speech with you. I'll email it over. I'd love your thoughts." The email arrived 10 minutes later. The subject line read, "Our story." I opened it with a sense of dread that felt like a physical weight on my chest. I sat down at my kitchen table, Alex hovering nearby, sensing my anxiety. I started to read. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. The speech was a work of staggering fiction, a masterpiece of narcissistic revisionism. It painted my father, a quiet and decent man, as a monster who had abandoned his family with nothing. It detailed nights Meredith had supposedly spent crying herself to sleep, worried about how she would feed us, completely erasing the generous support checks he'd sent every month. Then it moved on to her sainthood. There were paragraphs dedicated to the home-cooked meals she'd slaved over, the homework sessions that lasted for hours, the bedtime stories she'd read every single night. She described herself as a lioness, fiercely protective and endlessly present. She even took credit for my achievements, framing my scholarship to college as the direct result of her tireless support and sacrifice. "I knew my daughter had it in her," she had written. "I pushed her, I nurtured her talent, because I always knew she was destined for great things, and I would stop at nothing to see her succeed." I felt the blood drain from my face. I hadn't just been a supporting actor in her play, I had been a ghost. My own efforts, my own struggles, my own hard work, all of it had been completely erased, absorbed into her narrative. I was not a person. I was a prop she used to prove her own greatness. But the final lines of the speech were what truly broke me. She planned to end by addressing my unborn child directly. "And to my precious grandchild," she'd written, "I want you to know that you are coming into a family built on the foundation of a mother's unbreakable love. Your own mother learned from the very best. I taught her everything she knows about sacrifice, about strength, about what it means to be a mother." I slammed my laptop shut. A strangled sound, half sob and half scream, escaped my lips. I was shaking with a rage so pure and so profound it terrified me. This wasn't just a lie anymore. This was an attempt to colonize my own motherhood, to claim my future child's story before it had even started. She was positioning herself as the source of all good things in my life, ensuring that even my own parenting would be seen as a reflection of her. "What is it?" Alex asked, his hand on my shoulder. I couldn't speak. I just pushed the laptop back open and pointed at the screen. He read the speech, his jaw tightening with every word. When he finished, he closed the laptop gently and looked at me, his eyes dark with anger. "You can't let her read this," he said. It wasn't a question. "I know," I whispered. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me, and called her. I attempted to be diplomatic. "Mom, I read the speech," I started, my voice trembling slightly. "It's very dramatic, but I think some of it is, well, I remember things a little differently." Differently, her voice, once warm and effusive, turned sharp and cold. "What do you mean, differently? These are my memories, Lila. This is my story of raising you." "It's my story, too," I said, a bit of strength returning to my voice. And in my story, I'm the one who cooked most of the meals. I'm the one who helped Ethan with his homework. You were at the theater most nights. The silence on the other end of the line was frigid. When she finally spoke, her voice was laced with the venom of a true narcissist who has just suffered an unforgivable injury. "How dare you?" she hissed. "After everything I have done for you, everything I sacrificed. I gave you your entire life, and this is the thanks I get? You're trying to humiliate me. You are a selfish, ungrateful child." "I'm not a child anymore, Mom," I said, the words tasting strange and powerful on my tongue. "And I'm not ungrateful. I'm just asking for the truth." "The truth is that you're trying to ruin this beautiful tribute, this gift I am giving you," she screeched. "Well, I am not changing a single word. This is my story to tell, and I will tell it at your shower. The guests deserve to know what a wonderful mother you had." She hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The finality of her words echoed in the silent kitchen. She had drawn her line in the sand. She was going to stand up in a room full of my friends and family and deliver a performance that LD erased me completely. Something inside me shifted. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowed truths and forced smiles, coalesced into a single point of cold, hard clarity. She thought this was her story. She thought she had the right to tell it. But she was wrong. It was my story, my life, my childhood. And if she was determined to give the performance of a lifetime, then I would have to prepare one of my own. The show, I decided, must go on, but it wouldn't be the one she was expecting. The fury that had consumed me after the phone call with my mother eventually subsided, leaving behind a cold, clear sense of purpose. For years, I had navigated her world, abiding by her rules and her script. Now, I was a social worker, a professional trained to deal with dysfunctional family systems. I spent my days helping others find their voice and establish healthy boundaries. It was time to take my own advice. The first step was to seek validation, to anchor my own memories in the testimony of others. My truth felt solid to me, but I knew Meredith's greatest skill was making others believe she was the victim, and I was the cruel, unstable one. To counter her narrative, I needed more than just my own word. There was only one person in our family who had always stood just outside the blast radius of my mother's personality: her older sister, my Aunt Susan. A retired librarian, Susan was the complete opposite of Meredith. Where Meredith was loud, Susan was quiet. Where Meredith was performative, Susan was observant. She lived a few towns over, and while she was always present at major family events, she maintained a polite but distinct distance from my mother's theatrical displays. I had a feeling she had been a silent audience member to our family's drama for years. I called her and asked if I could come visit, using the excuse of wanting to borrow some of her old maternity clothes. She agreed immediately, her voice warm and welcoming. When I arrived at her cozy, book-filled house, she had a cup of chamomile tea waiting for me. We made small talk for a few minutes, about the baby, about Alex's job, but she had a knowing look in her eyes. It was as if she knew I hadn't driven 45 minutes just for a box of old sweaters. Finally, I took a deep breath and plunged in. "Aunt Susan," I began, "Mom is planning to give this big speech at the baby shower, a tribute to her life as a single mom." Susan's lips thinned into a straight line. She simply nodded. "I can imagine." "She sent me a draft," I continued, my voice wavering. "And it's not true, none of it. She's painted this picture of herself as a martyr, and it erases everything I did, everything I had to be." I watched her face carefully, terrified that she too would tell me I was being ungrateful. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her touch was firm and steady. "Lila," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I have been waiting for you to see this for 20 years. Your mother, she lives in a story. She always has. And in her story, she is always the hero. It's easier for her than living in the real world." A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy washed over me. "So you saw it, you knew." "Oh, honey, we all knew," she said with a sad smile. "We saw you. We saw you on that step stool, cooking for Ethan. We saw you walking him to school because Meredith had an early rehearsal. We saw you turn into a little adult before you ever got the chance to be a child. Nobody ever knew how to say anything. Challenging Meredith is like trying to stop a hurricane with a handheld fan. It was easier to just let her blow through. She confessed her own regret in the situation, admitting that the family had enabled Meredith's behavior by prioritizing peace over truth. She got up and went to a bookshelf, pulling down a thick, leather-bound photo album. "Your mother curated her own photos for her story," she said, "but there are other photos, other stories." She opened the album. There were pictures I'd never seen before, a photo from my 12th birthday. Meredith was beaming, holding a cake, the perfect picture of a doting mother, but Susan pointed to the edge of the frame. "Look," she said. "That's the grocery store box the cake came in. I remember that day." Meredith forgot it was your birthday until I called her that morning. She ran out and bought that cake an hour before the party. She turned the page. There was a photo of me, about 14, sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, a calculator in my hand. I looked tired. "I took this one," Susan said quietly. "It was a Saturday. You were paying the household bills. Meredith was out shopping with a friend from the theater." Every photograph was a quiet rebuttal of Meredith's grand narrative. It was the proof I needed. It wasn't just my memory against hers. It was reality. Before I left, Susan gave me a hug that felt like an apology and an endorsement all in one. "Whatever you decide to do, Lila," she whispered, "you have a right to your own story." Buoyed by my aunt's validation, I knew my next conversation had to be with Alex. That night, I laid everything out for him, not just the memories, but the plan that was beginning to form in my mind. I told him I couldn't let my mother deliver her speech. I had to counter it. "I want to show my own slideshow," I said, the idea feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I want to show the truth, odd in an angry way, but just factually. This is what happened." Alex listened patiently, his engineering mind processing the problem and the proposed solution. I half expected him to suggest a more moderate approach, like talking to her again or just letting it go. Instead, his response was immediate and resolute. "I'm in," he said. 100%. She doesn't get to do this to you. She doesn't get to define you, and she certainly doesn't get to define our child's history. What do you need me to do?" His unwavering support was the final piece of armor I needed. We spent the next hour talking through the logistics. He would handle the technical side, setting up a projector and a laptop, ensuring a seamless transition. My job was to assemble the counter-narrative. The last conversation was the one I dreaded most. I had to try to talk to my brother, Ethan. He was 6 years younger than me, and his entire perception of our childhood had been shaped by Meredith's script. He saw her as a fun, creative, and devoted mother. He didn't remember the neglect because I had always been there to fill the void. I had been his de facto parent. I met him for coffee. I tried to be gentle. "Ethan," I started, "I need to talk to you about Mom and about the shower. She's planning on saying some things that aren't really true." He immediately got defensive. "What are you talking about? Mom worked so hard for us. She did everything." "She did a lot of things, Ethan, but she wasn't always there. Do you remember who stayed home with you when you had chickenpox for a week in 3rd grade?" He frowned, thinking, "Mom did." "No," I said softly. "I did. I stayed home from school for the entire week to take care of you. Mom was directing our town. She came home in the evenings, but I was the one there all day." He shook his head, looking confused and angry. "I don't remember that. You've been weird about Mom lately. You're just trying to make her look bad. She's so excited about this baby. Why are you trying to ruin it for her?" The conversation was a dead end. He was too deep inside her story, and my truth was a threat to his entire understanding of our family. It hurt more than I could have imagined. Leaving that coffee shop, I realized that exposing my mother's lies might cost me my relationship with my brother. It was a devastating thought, but it didn't change my resolve. The truth was more important. My child deserved to be born into a family that valued truth over performance. The quiet conversations were over. It was time to prepare for the public address. With Alex as my technical director and Aunt Susan as my emotional consultant, I began the process of building my counter-narrative. My goal was not to create a spectacle of anger or to sling mud. A screaming match would only make me look unstable and Meredith look like a victim, which was her favorite role. No, my approach had to be methodical, factual, and undeniable. It had to be a quiet, powerful presentation of the truth, delivered with the calm authority of a historian, not the fury of an angry daughter. The centerpiece of the plan was, as I'd told Alex, my own slideshow. I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of archaeological digging, unearthing the artifacts of my own childhood from dusty boxes in our attic and forgotten albums at Aunt Susan's house. I wasn't looking for unflattering photos of my mother. In fact, I avoided them. I was looking for photos that, on the surface, looked perfectly normal, but told a completely different story to the person who had lived them. The first photo I chose was the one Meredith had mentioned on the phone, the one of me at 10 years old holding a crying Ethan on my lap after he'd scraped his knee. It was the perfect opening. She saw a nurturing sister. I saw a parent. For the slideshow, I paired it with a simple, factual caption, me age 10 and Ethan age 4. I was babysitting while Mom was at a commercial audition. Summer 1998. No emotion, no accusation, just a fact. Next, I found a picture of my 12th birthday party, the one Aunt Susan had mentioned. Meredith was standing behind me, her hands on my shoulders, both of us smiling at the store-bought cake. It looked like a lovely mother-daughter moment. My caption, my 12th birthday. Aunt Susan reminded Mom in the morning, so she picked up a cake on her way home from her friend's house. I had already planned my own party with my friends. March 2000. I found photo after photo, each one a building block in the true story of our lives. There was a picture of me standing proudly next to a science fair project, a ridiculously complex volcano I had built. The school newspaper had done a little feature on the winners. My caption read, "My 7th grade science fair project. I won first place. Mom was in tech week for guys and dolls and couldn't make it, but she told everyone she helped me build it for weeks." April 2002. There was a photo of me, 6th. 8 years old in a slightly too large dress, standing next to Ethan, who was in his first little suit for his middle school graduation. My caption, Ethan's 8th grade graduation. I did all his graduation shopping and took him to the ceremony because Mom had a non-refundable weekend getaway planned with her theater friends. June 2008. The process was emotionally grueling. Each photograph was a small trauma, a reminder of a moment I had been forced to be the adult. But with each caption I wrote, I felt a piece of myself clicking back into place. I was reclaiming my own history, one verifiable fact at a time. To add weight to my presentation, I reached out to a few carefully selected people, as my aunt had suggested. I called my dad. We had a decent, if somewhat distant, relationship. He'd remarried and moved away, tired of the drama Meredith created. I told him what she was planning to say about him in her speech. He just sighed, a sound of weary resignation I knew all too well. "Lila, she's been telling that story for 20 years, he said. Let it go." "I can't, Dad," I said. "Not anymore. I'm not asking you to do anything, but I am going to tell the truth. I just wanted you to know." I then asked him if he still had his old financial records. He did. He was a meticulous man. I asked him if he would be willing to scan and email me a few redacted copies of the canceled child support and alimony checks from a year Meredith claimed she was nearly destitute. He was hesitant at first, not wanting to stir the pot. But when I explained that my only goal was to present facts, not to start a war, he agreed. I also reached out to my godmother, a childhood friend of Meredith's who had grown distant over the years. I asked her if she remembered the time Ethan had chickenpox. Her email back was a revelation. "Of course, I remember," she wrote. "Your mother called me every day that week to complain about how you weren't letting her get enough sleep, because you were so worried about Ethan you kept waking her up to ask questions. I told her she should be the one staying home, not you. We had a huge fight about it. It was one of the reasons we drifted apart. I asked if I could use her words anonymously. She agreed. Alex was my rock through it all. He sat with me for hours as I went through the photos, listening as I recounted the stories behind them. He set up a scanner and helped me digitize everything. Then, he masterfully edited it all together into a simple, elegant video presentation. We chose a neutral, sans serif font for the captions. There was no music, no dramatic transitions. The power was in the stark, unadorned evidence. The final piece was the narration. I wrote a short, calm script to accompany the slideshow. It didn't attack my mother. It simply reframed the narrative. I would thank her for her story, and then I would offer my own collection of memories as a gift to my unborn child, a gift of truth. I practiced reading it out loud until I could get through it without my voice shaking. A few nights before the shower, Alex and I watched the finished product. It was about 5 minutes long. As the last photo faded to black, the silence in our living room was profound. "It's devastating," Alex said softly, "and you didn't raise your voice once." "That's the point," I replied, feeling a strange sense of peace. Her power comes from drama, from big emotions. I'm not going to play that game. I'm just going to present the evidence, like a social worker presenting a case file. He put his arm around me. "Are you ready for this, for the fallout?" I thought about my child, sleeping soundly in my womb, a being who knew nothing of these complicated histories. They deserved a world free of this fiction. They deserved a mother who was whole and unafraid. "Yes," I said, my voice firm, "I'm ready." The day of the baby shower arrived, bright and unseasonably warm. The banquet room at the country club was exactly as Meredith had envisioned, elegant to the point of being ostentatious. Tables were draped in white linen, elaborate floral centerpieces reached for the ceiling, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. It felt less like a baby shower and more like a wedding reception for a bride who didn't exist. My mother was in her element, gliding through the room like a queen in her court. She wore a flowing, lavender dress and a smile that was both dazzling and completely artificial. She greeted each guest with a dramatic embrace, accepting their compliments on the beautiful event as if she were receiving an award. I was a secondary character in the production, the pregnant prop that gave her the excuse to be the star. Alex stayed close to my side, a silent, solid presence. He had a laptop bag slung over his shoulder, containing our secret weapon. My brother Ethan arrived late, looking uncomfortable. He gave me a stiff, awkward hug and avoided my eyes, choosing instead to be swept up in it. Dramatic greeting from Meredith. The rift between us was a physical ache in my chest. Aunt Susan, however, sought me out immediately. She squeezed my hand, her eyes full of a quiet, fierce support that spoke volumes. "Just remember to breathe," she whispered. After an hour of mingling and a lunch that was far too formal, Meredith tapped a glass with a spoon, calling for everyone's attention. Her smile widened. The moment had arrived. It was time for her performance. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice resonating with practiced emotion. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate my daughter, Lila, and the new life she is bringing into the world. As I look at her, on the cusp of motherhood herself, I can't help but reflect on our own journey." She launched into the speech I had read in the email. It was even more saccharine and self-congratulatory when spoken aloud. She hit all the key points: her heartbreak after the divorce, her tireless work ethic, the lonely nights, the endless sacrifices. I watched the faces of the guests. The newer friends and distant relatives were captivated, dabbing at their eyes with napkins. My godmother, however, stared at her plate, a tight expression on her face. My Aunt Susan looked at me with an almost imperceptible nod. Alex gave my hand a gentle squeeze under the table. It was almost time. "I put together a little something," Meredith continued, gesturing toward the large projector screen that had been set up. "A few snapshots to remember the road we traveled together." This was our cue. As Meredith fumbled for a moment with the remote for her slideshow, I pushed my chair back and stood up. The movement was quiet but decisive enough to draw the room's attention. Meredith paused, looking at me with a flicker of irritation. "Lila, darling, what is it?" "Mom, thank you," I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the perfect acoustics of the room. I had practiced this line 100 times. That was a beautiful story. Your story is so important. But today, I was hoping to share a few memories of my own. I've been thinking a lot about the childhood that made me who I am, and I put together a little something as well. A tribute to the childhood that prepared me for the mother I hope to be. A confused murmur rippled through the guests. Meredith's smile froze on her face, the warmth instantly gone, replaced by a cold, hard panic in her eyes. Before she could formulate a protest, Alex was already at the front of the room. He efficiently unplugged her laptop from the projector cable and plugged in his own. The whole exchange took less than 10 seconds. "What are you doing?" Meredith hissed, but her voice was drowned out as the first image appeared on the screen. It was the photo of me, age 10, holding a sobbing Ethan. The simple caption appeared beneath it, "Me, age 10, and Ethan, age 4. I was babysitting while Mom was at a commercial audition. Summer 1998. I began to speak, my voice calm and measured, just as I had rehearsed. "My mother's story is one of great sacrifice," I said, addressing the room. "My story is one of responsibility. I learned to be a caregiver very early. This is me, looking after my brother, a role I was always happy to have." The next slide appeared, my 12th birthday party. My 12th birthday, March 2000. I didn't even need to read the full caption. The image itself, paired with my calm tone, started to shift the atmosphere in the room. Slide after slide, the counter-narrative unfolded. The science fair project. Ethan's graduation. Each image was accompanied by my quiet, factual narration. I wasn't angry. I wasn't crying. I was simply presenting information. I felt like I was giving a eulogy for the fictional childhood everyone had been sold for 20 years. When the scanned, redacted copy of my father's child support check appeared on the screen, a collective gasp went through the room. Meredith made a choking sound. "Child support and alimony were paid consistently," the caption read. "Totaling over $3,000 a month in 2004, the year Mom said we barely had enough for food." The quote from my godmother appeared on a black screen, the white text stark and powerful. "I remember your mother complaining that you were waking her up at night when Ethan had chickenpox. I told her she should be the one staying home from work, not a 13-year-old girl." The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. No one looked at Meredith. Everyone was looking at me, or at the screen, their expressions a mixture of shock, pity, and dawning understanding. I saw Ethan's face. He was pale, his eyes wide, fixed on the photo of me at his graduation. It was like he was seeing me for the first time. The final slide was a recent photo of Alex and me, standing in the unfinished nursery, smiling, with our hands on my stomach. The caption simply said, "Our baby, our story, built on a foundation of truth, 2025. I finished my narration. "I love my mother," I said, finally looking directly at her. Her face was a mask of pure, white-hot fury. "And I am grateful for the life I have, but the story of my childhood is mine to tell, and the story of my child will be one of honesty. Thank you." I sat down. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. It was finally broken when Aunt Susan stood up and began to applaud, slowly and deliberately. A few other people, my godmother included, hesitantly joined in. The spell was broken. Meredith, her face contorted, sputtered, "She's lying. This is a performance. She's always been so dramatic." But her words had lost their power. The evidence had been too compelling, my delivery too calm. Her accusations of drama, in the face of her own theatrical life, sounded hollow and absurd. The unscheduled eulogy was over. The lie was dead. The immediate aftermath of my presentation was a strange and surreal tableau of social collapse. The polite applause died out, replaced by a thick, awkward silence that no one seemed to know how to break. Meredith stood frozen by the projector screen, her face a pallid mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. She looked like a queen whose subjects had just calmly and methodically dismantled her throne in front of the entire court. Guests who moments before had been laughing and sipping punch now avoided eye contact with everyone. They began to invent sudden, urgent reasons to leave. A forgotten appointment, a looming headache, a babysitter who needed to be relieved. They offered me quick, mumbled congratulations that were tinged with pity and gave my mother a wide, fearful berth as they scurried out of the room. The party, so meticulously planned and extravagantly executed, dissolved in less than 15 minutes, leaving behind a battlefield of half-eaten cake and wilted floral arrangements. The only people who remained were Alex, Aunt Susan, my brother Ethan, and my mother. Ethan was the first to break the silence. He looked from me to the blank screen and then to our mother, his expression a chaotic jumble of confusion, betrayal, and dawning horror. Is any of that true?" he whispered, his voice cracking. Before I could answer, Meredith's paralysis broke, and she erupted. The storm had arrived. "True," she shrieked, her voice echoing in the cavernous, empty room. "Of course it's not true. She's twisted everything. She's a vindictive, hateful child who is trying to destroy me because she's jealous. She was always jealous of my talent, of my friends." It was the classic narcissistic defense: deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. But for the first time in my life, her words had no effect on me. I didn't feel the need to argue or defend myself. The evidence had already been presented. "Meredith, stop it," Aunt Susan said, her voice quiet but carrying an immense weight of authority. "Just stop. We all saw it. We lived it. It's over." My mother turned her fury on her sister. You were always on her side. You've been poisoning her against me for years." I stood up and faced her, Alex right beside me. "This isn't about sides, Mom," I said calmly. "This was about the truth. I will not have my child raised in a lie. I will not allow you to tell my story for me anymore." She stared at me, her eyes wild. For a moment, I think she finally understood that she had lost control, that her director's chair was empty, and the actors were off script for good. That realization didn't lead to remorse. It led to pure, undiluted rage. With a guttural scream, she swept a vase of flowers off a nearby table, sending water, glass, and petals crashing to the floor. Then she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room without another word. The silence she left in her wake was different. It was a silence of wreckage, but also of release. Ethan sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Aunt Susan came over and put her arms around me. "I'm proud of you," she said. "That took more courage than anything I've ever seen." The days that followed were a mix of quiet healing and painful fallout. The storm from my mother came in the form of a barrage of text messages and voicemails. They alternated between venomous attacks, pathetic pleas for sympathy, and attempts to gaslight me into believing I had imagined everything. I read the first few, then, with Alex's support, I blocked her number. I established the ultimate boundary: silence. The most difficult consequence was with Ethan. He called me 2 days later, his voice heavy with conflict. "I don't know what to believe, Lila," he confessed. "My whole life I thought she was this hero, and now you've made her look like a monster." "I didn't make her look like anything, Ethan," I replied gently. "I just showed what happened. You were too young to see it, and I was too busy protecting you from it. My only mistake was protecting you for too long, letting you believe the story because it was easier." Our conversation wasn't a breakthrough, but it was a beginning. He was angry at me for the public nature of the confrontation, for the humiliation. But he was also, for the first time, questioning the bedrock of his own childhood. He needed space to process, and I gave it to him. Months passed. The silence from my mother was absolute. I learned through Aunt Susan that she had told her remaining friends that I had suffered a severe mental breakdown due to pregnancy hormones, and that she was giving me space to heal. It was her final, desperate attempt to control the narrative, but the seeds of doubt had been sown. The story was no longer hers to command. Then, one autumn afternoon, my water broke. Our son, Oliver, was born healthy and screaming, with a full head of dark hair. Lying in the hospital bed, holding him in my arms, I felt a profound sense of peace. The cycle was broken. This little boy would never have to be an adult before his time. He would never have to cook his own meals or manage a household budget. He would have a mother whose full attention and love were his, without condition or performance.